Hello, and thank you for listening to the History of World War II podcast, episode 601, Operation Hardgate. Last time, as Hitler ordered for his German troops to be evacuated from Sicily, measures were taken and men selected to make sure their escape route was as shielded as possible. All transport vessels were now under one command, supplies were waiting for the troops when they reached Messina, and enough AA guns were on both Sicily and Italy to give the Allied attacking planes pause. At least that was the hope. Meanwhile, FDR and Prime Minister Churchill had planned for the next phase of the war. Italy would be invaded, but Messina had to be conquered first. Of course, the first step was getting through the Axis defensive line so Messina could be reached, and this would be achieved by Operation Hardgate. Hopefully. The idea was to pick a part or section of the Axis defensive line and hit it with overwhelming numbers. That section was centered around the city of Adrano, located to the southwest corner or the 8 o'clock position of Mount Etna. Involved would be 3.5 British and 4 American divisions. First, Air Marshal Sir Arthur Cunningham, commander of the Northwestern African Tactical Air Force, was responsible for everything from disrupting the enemy's supply lines, supporting the ground fighting, to watching over all of the Allied ships in the area. With the third dimension covered, General Lee's 30th Corps would make for Adrano itself, but first a path had to be cleared to the city. Starting during darkness of July 29th, the 1st Canadian Division would approach and take Rigabuto, about 12 miles west-southwest of Adrano. This was considered the British left flank. Meanwhile, the newly arrived 78th Division would take Centuripe, about 6 miles southwest of Adrano. Think of Centuripe as being in between Rigabuto and Adrano, but just a little to the south. This was the British center of the attack. But even this center attack had to have its way cleared, and doing that would be the 3rd Canadian Infantry Brigade, temporarily assigned to the 78th Division, which would create and hold a bridgehead over the Ditano River near Cantanuova, south of Centuripe. And representing the British right flank was the 51st Highland Division, which would also capture a bridgehead over the Ditano River, but more to the right, or east. With all of this done, the way to Adrano would be cleared, and these moves were to be completed by August 1st. We'll see. And when done, the 30th Corps Artillery would move up to support the actual attack on Adrano, which would take place next. The Canadians would hit it from the west, the 78th Division would hit it from the southeast. As for the Americans, they were holding down other Axis units further north so they could not assist with the defense of Adrano, meaning the 2nd U.S. Corps would push along the Highway 113 along the northern coast and Highway 120 just north of Mount Etna. Patton had been told to push in and look for opportunities. But facing this coming attack was General Hoobe's men, 2 battalions of the 29th Panzer Grenadier Division, now joined by Major General Free's 15th and 17th Panzer Grenadier Regiments, an artillery regiment, flak and engineer battalions with an anti-tank company. These units had been sent over when the political trouble in Rome was discovered by Berlin. Well, that might have been resolved by Mussolini's removal, but now that these additional troops were there, Kesselring would keep them there. Yes, he knew that Sicily would eventually be lost, but it made sense to bottle up the enemy on the island as long as possible. So he would. But very few plans, Axis or Ally, survive meeting reality. Days before Operation Hardgate commenced, the Allies had suffered setbacks and loss. The Canadians, having just taken Osorto and Leonforte, were now aiming for Aguirre, halfway between the captured Leonforte and the soon-to-be attacked Rigabuto. But first, they had to get through the smaller town of Nisoria, also along the highway, just over 2 miles west of Aguirre. The plan here was for the 1st Brigade and the 231st Infantry Brigade to attack Nasiriyah in a pincer movement, but the men of the 15th Panzer Grenadier were already there and on the heights that dominated the southern approach to Nasiriyah, which is the way the 231st Brigade was coming. Still, on General Simon's orders, the 231st did as they were told, taking the height close to the town to the south. No, it was the 1st Canadian Brigade's attack from the west that was stalled. On July 14th, the 1st Brigade came on, supported by the 12th Canadian tanks and artillery. Problem is, the artillery shells started getting too far ahead of the infantry and tanks. This allowed the Germans to duck when the shells came and then get back up to then fire at the approaching enemy. Soon, the Canadians lost 10 tanks, taken out by anti-tank guns. The second attack on Nasiriyah from the west was also stalled. Now, Major Tweedy tried to lead the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment, but they were solidly stopped by 14 machine gun positions and 3 Mark III tanks. Taking casualties, Tweedy had his men fall back. A third attack, this one by the 48th Highlanders of Canada, during the afternoon of July 25th, also failed. Knowing the definition of insanity, something different would be tried. During the evening of July 26th, the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry Battalion made their attempt, but as they were supported by 80 large guns, each firing 139 rounds, as well as fighter bombers, the PPCLI did manage to get through.
It's tax season, and at LifeLock, we know you're tired of numbers. But here's a big one you need to hear. Billions. That's the amount of money in refunds the IRS has flagged for possible identity fraud. Now here's another big number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, we'll fix it guaranteed. One last big number. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast for the threats you can't control. Terms apply.
With Nasiriyah taken, it was time to continue pushing east along Highway 121 to Agira. But this attempt, or rather attempts, would cost much Canadian blood as well. While the Canadians had been banging their heads near Nasiriyah along Highway 121, the Hampshires from 231 Brigade, coming from the south, had managed to cut the road just east of the target town, Agira. This was to stop the enemy from retreating once Agira fell. But the Hampshires soon had to retreat, as the Canadians, as we have seen, couldn't take Nasiriyah on their first try, to then push on and threaten Agira from the west. This allowed the Germans at Agira to just focus on the Hampshires and push them back further south. So the 48th Highlanders charged Agira from the south and, like the Hastings had, managed to cut the road again just east of the town. But again, they had to leave what they had captured, as the Canadians had failed a second time to take Nasiriyah and come further east. And this would happen a third time, only for the position to be lost a third time. For each morning with daylight, the Germans in Agira, being on a higher elevation than the Allied troops around them, would simply shell those around them trying to cut off their escape route. The fourth time of taking the road east of Agira was during the night of July 26th, 27th, and this would take, which would force the Germans to back away. But the part of the plan cutting off the Germans' retreat had failed, as it had taken 5 days to capture Agira. And it had cost the Canadians 438 casualties, with 231 Brigade suffering over 300 casualties of their own. Still, now that Agira was taken, it was time to continue east, now on to Rigabuto. And with 231 Brigade leading the Canadian division, it managed to reach a point just 1 mile short of the town. By the last day of July, the Germans, seeing what was coming, pulled themselves back into the town proper to strengthen their defenses there. And like when they were at Agira, they would hold out longer than the Allies had planned for. The problem for the Canadians now was that the road, Highway 121, had, to either side of it, a ridge where Germans had tanks and artillery up higher than them, and those were in the hands of their engineer battalion from the Hermann Goering Division, specifically the 4th Battery of the same division's artillery regiment and a company of the 3rd Parachute Regiment. The Germans were ordered here to hold out at all costs. On July 29th, the attack on Rigabuto got underway. 1st Battalion of the Hampshires was stopped by machine guns, mortars, and Nebewerfers. To their right, the 1st Dorsets did a bit better. Still, they were short of their goal. So during the night of July 30th, 31st, the 2nd Devons attacked from the northwest, hoping for a bit of surprise. To what degree this surprise helped achieve success, who can say? But it might have been more due to the 144 artillery pieces assisting them. So at 2:35 a.m., now July 31st, the 2nd Devons radioed in their success. The eastern approach to Rigabuto was taken. And yet, having been bled, what with at least 200 casualties of their own, they were unable to hold off a determined German counterattack. Soon they were leaving the eastern edge of the ridge that they had climbed up. Fortunately, a reserve company now charged forward, taking on the now tired and weakened Germans who had counterattacked. That, combined with Kitty Hawk fighter bombers assisting, allowed the reserve company to retake the earlier position. Hopefully, Rigabuto would soon fall. More good news, the Dorsets took the height to the north of the Highway 121, just before or to the west of Rigabuto. But it had been hard fought, so they were relieved by the 48th Canadian Highlanders. And so relieved, the Dorsets now planned on trying to enter the town proper. The lead Canadian units met resistance along the road, but it was not unbearable. They kept moving forward. By August 1st, they had entered the edge of the town, but again, they were now exhausted. A patrol of the 48th Highlanders caught up to them and would probe deeper into town to carry out reconnaissance. When they came back to the Dorsets, they were able to say the town had been abandoned. There were no Germans there. They had been ordered to leave at midnight. For all of the time that the Germans had bought with their resistance, still days, not weeks, the Hermann Goering Engineer Battalion had practically been wiped out in doing this. To be sure, they gave almost as bad as they got, with the Devons losing 72, with another 82 being wounded. The Canadians moved on, seemingly ever eastward. Now it was the 2nd Brigade taking the lead, heading for Andrano, about 8 miles away. Back on the 9th of July 31st, the 51st Division had crossed the Detano River to the south-southeast of all of this fighting. The 154th and 152nd Brigades were moving north as best they could, but soon they came upon a ridge still south of the highway, defended by the 1st Battalion of the 2nd Panzer Grenadier Regiment. Making their jobs hard, even before engaging the Germans, were hills covered with groves, lemon and orange trees, and cactus and prickly pear, not to mention that each plot had a stone wall around it. But on August 1st, the Allies must have been getting too close for the Germans because they counterattacked. Ironically, the same terrain helping the Germans defend now helped the men of the 51st Division defend. The counterattack did not work, so the Germans began to back up. To Allied thinking, all of this was a prelude to the Battle of Adrano, again hard upon Mount Etna. But as the Canadians and British moved ever closer to Adrano from the west and southwest, they found out that the way forward to the German thinking was going to be stopped at Centoripe. The town of Centoripe is practically at the halfway point between Santa Nueva, near the Detano River, to the south, where the British had started from, going to the northeast, say 5 miles from Santa Nuova to Centoripe, and then another 6 miles from Centoripe to Adrano. As the British 78th Division had been fighting its way north towards Highway 121, one particular battle saw Lance Corporal Chadwick of the East Surrey Regiment capture a wounded German officer of the Hermann Goering Division, who just happened to have a copy of all future German plans in regards to Sicily in his briefcase. For this, he would be awarded the military medal. The German officer's briefcase was quickly sent to divisional headquarters, and soon Divisional Commander General Ivlay had Monty knocking at his door. Literally, as each paragraph of the notes were translated into English, both officers were given a copy. It soon became clear that the Germans planned on making a determined stand at Centoripe, taking advantage of the town being at the top of a rise, and it only had one very curvy road getting to it. Looking at the cover photo for this episode, you can see that Centoripe looks like a starfish or a human with its limbs splayed out, while the town itself literally covers just the heights of that shape. The Germans had chosen well. Still, this was only one of several hills almost in a line, and German units were on most of the other hills. Side note, in time, another story would come out that this information, the German plans, was really gathered by Ultra. But to cover this, the story about Lance Corporal Chadwick was put out. Either way, he was going to be rewarded, and the British knew of the Germans' intent. Defending Centoripe was the 2nd Battalion and a field battery with an anti-tank troop from the Hermann Goering Division and the 1st Battalion of the 3rd Parachute Regiment. As for the road that led to Centoripe, it was all twists and turns. It was ready-made for ambushes, plural. Besides, the road was mined. If all else failed, the Germans could hit a switch and the road would become impassable. Yes, the Germans were serious about holding here because from here, Highway 121 to the north could be shelled, and the road to the east that led to just below Mount Etna could also be shelled, which would stop the 8th Army there from advancing north from the Primosol Bridge. Major General Ivlay ordered Brigadier Nelson Russell, commander of the 38th Irish Infantry Brigade, to capture Centoripe. The plan was rather straightforward, perhaps too much so. There would be a night attack by the 6th Battalion Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers and the 1st Battalion Royal Irish Fusiliers with artillery support, while the 2nd Battalion London Irish Rifles was to swing west of the town to capture some hills, again with the German troops occupying them that were supporting the main defenders. It was time. Late in the day on August 1st, the London Irish moved out to the west of the town. There was no transport available, so the men had to carry their own supplies. Hence, they got to move out first, needing the extra time. They were the left flank attack. The center attack, immediately west of the town, would be carried out by the Royal Irish Fusiliers, and they approached Centoripe just west of the road, staying away from that, and the right flanking attack would be carried out by the 6th Battalion Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers. On the far left, the London Irish Rifles had reached a point west of town. Their goal was to take 3 hills, from left to right, hills 611, 704, and 703. These were basically west-northwest of the town. After noon, August 2nd, the London Irish Rifles were in position. After a 15-minute barrage on the hills by British 25-pounders, the Rifles advanced. No one on the Allied side knew what enemy strength was on those hills, but they all hoped that the Germans' attention would be towards the southern approaches to the town, not to the west of it. Though taking casualties caused by German machine gun positions on the hills, hills 704 and 703 were taken that day. Hill 611, the furthest west, was still defiant, and it did not help to have the enemy at your back. Still, the goal was to move closer towards the town regardless. The Royal Irish Fusiliers, moving up north, still just west of the road, moved up and soon were on the western edge of the town proper. Still, they had been bled just to get here. When the Royal Irish Fusiliers had been further south, the Germans, well hidden, had actually let them bypass their lines. Then at night, the Germans came out of their hiding places and rushed at the Allied troops, now in their rear, causing casualties, but then they would keep running north just to get to the next defensive line. This had worked well for the Germans. Still, they were losing ground. And now the Royal Irish Fusiliers, having paid that price, were actually starting to come closer to the town from the north, having swung around its western edge. Meanwhile, the men of the 6th Battalion Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, making up the right flanking attack, fought their way to the southern edge of the town, which had required climbing up a 100-foot cliff. Back to the Royal Irish Fusiliers, they managed to enter Centuripe from the north, but again paid a price. Standing in their way now were 2 Panzer Mark III tanks. Of course, given the terrain and that the British did not possess the one road, they were not able to bring up any tanks. Fortunately, the Fusiliers had PIAT, or Projector Infantry Anti-Tank Weapons, portable anti-tank weapons created in 1942 and put into the field in 1943. This was London's shortcut to 1, not having enough of their own tanks, and 2, the Germans making the Panzers a centerpiece of their ground forces. The 2 Panzers were eventually taken out. The Irish Brigade now started the house-to-house fighting, but also here, the Germans were tough to dislodge, as the German paratroopers were elite forces, committed to defense. Still, by the evening, still August 2nd, the town was technically called cleared, which is when the Germans counterattacked. This attack would be pushed back, but enough German soldiers stayed in the town to now start sniping at the Irish. Another headache, a deadly one at that, to deal with. But this was not just the Germans trying to play spoiler. No, it was a setup for the next counterattack, which came during the early morning hours of August 3rd. This too would be beat back, mostly as the Germans had too few remaining troops to pour into this. By now, men from the center and right attacking points had entered the town as well, adding to the Germans' problems. The defenders, finding holding the town now untenable, evacuated, and they used the darkness and the Allies' time-consuming house-to-house searches. Monty would visit the captured town soon after. He took one look at the 100-foot cliff that the Inniskillings had to climb and simply said, "Impossible." Churchill would add his weight in praising the Irish Brigade in the House of Commons, using flowery phrases in describing overcoming the heights and then overcoming the tough German defenders, all in the August heat of Sicily. This good news was well received by the House of Commons and the British people. But, as the saying goes, there's no rest for the wicked. The Irish Brigade, having been praised to the skies, was ordered to move out. The Germans had moved out in good order for the next defensive position, so the men of the 38th Irish Brigade left Cherry Ripe behind, as many of them called the town that because they could not pronounce Centuripe. The 36th Brigade had taken the town, and now it was time for the 38th Irish to head north and to take a position to be ready to cross the Salso and Simeto rivers. Again, as the one road had a giant hole in it now, thanks to the departing Germans, it was the Irish once again walking across rough and uneven ground in the heat. Operation Hardgate was well begun, but it was still half done. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So we can see now that the Allies, and maybe this comes as a surprise, maybe it doesn't, but they finally have a bigger, comprehensive plan now to break the line and to bottle up the enemy and hopefully cut them off before they can escape. But again, it has begun. They are almost to Andrano, which is going to pierce the line to hopefully it starts to fall apart for the Germans. But again, the British and the Canadians, with the Americans more to the north, tying down other forces, have to earn it. And that's exactly the point the Germans want, because they want this to take time, because time gives you opportunity in battle and a lot of other things as well. So we'll see what happens. Anyways, so I don't have any new members, but I do have a donation from Gerald Parker. Gerald, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm not sure where you're from. It didn't say. But most people hide their location from me because they don't want me knocking on the door. I get that. Mostly family. Anyways, so so we'll see you later on this week, and we'll see how the rest of Operation Hardgate goes. Take care, everyone.